Hi, Mark Robertson back with you talking about my book, Carrying Lawn Chairs, Youth Sports and Other Parental Mindsets. You can get it on Amazon, electronic version or book version. And the book is divided into two sections. The first part we've covered parents, organized youth sports, and all the problems I have with it. I really don't think there are solutions to those problems, especially for very young kids in organized youth sports. I think it's crazy to put very young kids in organized youth sports. I wouldn't put a child into organized youth sports before age 10, maybe even 12. But the second part of the book, we talk about a number of other things related to the parent child dynamic. And today's topic, today's chapter is an extensive one on schooling. You could talk hours about that. But government schooling, in my opinion, has many problems. It was designed in a flawed way. It was brought about in a dubious way. It came to this country. The basically public school system in this country came from Prussia and Germany. And in Germany, it was designed not to educate, but to indoctrinate. Martin Luther was a big fan of it because he wanted to indoctrinate young people into Lutheranism. And the basic founder of the public school system in Prussia said it was all about indoctrinating and getting the kids. He didn't like free will. He didn't want the kids to have free will. He wanted them indoctrinated so they could be controlled. And of course, this system was brought to this country by a man named Horace Mann, and that's the public school system here. And you could argue that that system is about controlling and what it teaches about history and things like that. And so there are many problems in today's government or public schools. And I have a lot of problems with them. And like I say, they wanted to control the minds and indoctrinate and say, "Oh, you're some extremist for saying that." Well, that's how it was brought here. That was how it was designed when it first came here, and from Prussia, Germany. And of course, there are many problems in schools. In the 1960s, one of the worst moments is when they took prayer out of schools. Prayer in school is not unconstitutional. It's a total sham. There's no separation of church and state. You can pray in school. They took prayer out of school and brought birth control in. A nice move. Things are really going well now. And they have all this craziness, sex education. It's a disaster. Basically teaches kids to be promiscuous. It's a nightmare. And you can't teach right and wrong because God is out of the school. And you can't teach right and wrong based on biblical principles or things like that. Actually, the founding fathers wanted right and wrong to be taught in government schools or public schools, and they based that on, it's all talked about in the Northwest Ordinance, but they wanted it to be based on biblical principles. And so from the beginning, these schools, the founding fathers thought, you could teach right and wrong, but boy, we've evolved into today that you got to get church and state separate. Well, there's no separation of church and state. That's more indoctrination from the left. And by the way, someone's religion is being taught in schools. It's secular humanism. There's always somebody's point of view being taught, whether it's sex education or teaching history, crazy versions of history in school. So a government school is basically forcing taxpayers to pay for indoctrination of kids the way that the mostly left public school system wants it taught. Now, there are many good teachers in public schools, but in my opinion, the whole system is dysfunctional because it's dysfunctional at its foundation. The government money going toward that. Private schools are much better because the parents have an investment in it and they want their kids to learn. They aren't perfect either, but they want their kids to learn and they have a stake in it. Whereas now we actually do pay for it. Our taxpayer money pays for it, but you don't have a direct or seemingly a direct part of the school, a direct stake in it. And it causes problems. And we spend so much on education and the results are not good. And though they treat all kids the same, some kids learn differently. I mean, you send them to these schools, sit in these classes all day long in rows, and a lot of the guys can't learn. A lot of even the girls, they can't sit all day. Well, then they're ADHD. Well, we got to put them on some kind of drug so they can learn in school. That's insanity. It's totally insane to put a child on drugs because they can't learn in school the way that they brought it over from Russia, that they're from Prussia to teach them how to learn. They can't follow that school system. Children learn differently. And so many times in government schools and other schools. They think everybody should learn the same, and then these kids get depressed because they can't learn or can't keep up when it's just their learning style is different from the most kids, and so that's a problem as well. And the before government schooling came about, kids learned at home. Homeschooling was the way to go, or they learned in a one-room schoolhouse, and learning was much better. You go back and look at some of these things that these kids were studying in grade school and high school, literature, all kinds of great things, math and history, and they had great accomplishments in these small schools. And it's the same way today with local schooling, or homeschooling, I should say. And it seems like the homeschooled kids are educated in a much better way. And people say, well, yes, but they don't have these social skills. That's insane. Look at the social skills of these kids that go to school. They're all kind of crazy. Not all, but a lot of these kids that go to these schools have so much peer pressure. They behave in crazy ways. They want to be loved. They have bad home lives. And so they seek out love at school, and they do crazy things to get noticed. And, they want to get involved in these local cliques or things like that, or they wear blacks, or they have purple hair, or things like that. That's all a sign of yelling that they want to be loved, and they're not loved. They have a lack of that in their life, and they don't get that in these groups that they get involved in. It's just a nightmare. And the fact that kids are forced to go to school, that's even a problem. You think, well, that doesn't make any sense. All kids should go to school. But, education should be left up to the parents, and all education should be local. The Department of Education is a nightmare. The federal government should not be involved in education. It causes all the problems. The trust should be given to the local community. At the highest level, it should be the state, but the local community should be in charge of educating kids. We got to get back to that. It's crazy that the federal government is involved in education at all. As far as paying for it, it just has a lot of strings attached when they send money to these schools, and it just gets everything out of whack, and the incentives are out of whack, and the education of the child seems to be the last thing. It's this educational industrial complex. You get all these people making all this big money, six-figure incomes, and I'm not sure what they all do, but the education of the child seems to be down toward the bottom of the list. It's all about job security, pensions, perks, and things like that, and the teachers' unions and things like that seem to be harmful as well. They had a strike recently, and that these people were raising their right fist, the communist sign. So who knows what that's all about? Well, actually, we do know what it's all about. There's a bad element in government school teaching, and so it's just not a good situation. And we need to get back to local school. If the government's going to be involved, the highest level it should be is the state, ideally the city, but ideally we need to get the government out of education as an ultimate goal. I know that seems to be impractical, but the government harms education, especially the federal government. And then you have kids, like we were talking about earlier, that learn differently, and then that throws everything out of whack. Einstein and Edison, they struggled greatly in school, but yet they're geniuses. So a lot of times schools do not bring out the genius. Most times they don't, of young people. All young people, not just Edison and Einstein, but all young people. Kind of saps their desire to see the all beauty and wonder of the world, and to know that they are great individuals. It saps individuality. Matter of fact, they don't like individuality, as we talked about earlier. They don't like free will or individual thinking, or they like to keep everybody conformed and get them under the thumb of the state, and so they can control them later on. You think, well, this United States, that doesn't happen. Well, it likely doesn't happen to the degree it happened in other totalitarian regimes, but there's still that element of people wanting to control others and indoctrinate them into certain views, and to teach them, getting prayer out of school. That's a major factor right there. That's an indoctrination in reverse. It wants to take God out of the picture. And it's not because it's unconstitutional. It's because these people that want to control people don't like God, just like all good communists. They don't like God in the picture, and they want to get him out of there. It has nothing to do with the separation of church and state, because there is no separation of church and state. And they give government schools give kids a false impression of the world too. What are teachers? They're government employees, so they have a view that people work for the government. Now, like I said, there are some great teachers in public schools, but they would think that that's the way of society. You work for the government. They would, who knows? They might want to start a business or start a career that would be in the private sector. Well, they don't necessarily cut that down or try to talk you out of it, but it's just a way that you see the world. It gives you kind of a crazy view of the world that you work for the government, you teach, and things like this. So it doesn't give you a clear view of the world as some of these unique schools do, where they start maybe a career or a trade or something like that, and get out into the real world. And not everybody is be a welder or something like that, but you do learn more about the real world, whereas in government schools you really don't seem to. It's more of a false impression of the world. And they spend so much money on education. And then just kind of a brief word about college. I mean, you go to these colleges, they're charging $50,000-$60,000 a year, and even the state colleges charge a ton. And what do you get? I mean, unless you're going to be a doctor or an engineer or something, what do you get at college? You get a degree in Russian literature or something like that. What is that supposed to do? And then you're in debt $100,000. It's crazy. College is messed up. You cannot be, even if you're going to be a doctor, you have to get student loans. You could have six-figure student loans. I mean, it's crazy. This college system needs to be revamped. There needs to be a major overhaul of it. That's another form of control. You get all these kids paying all these debts, and they're in debt to the government. That's why the student loan system was taken over by the government. So they're basically slaves to the government for the first 20 years of their career, or however long it takes them to pay $150,000. And then they try to start a career as a doctor, and that field's messed up as well. So there's just a lot of problems. Like I say, we could go on and on and on about this education, all the problems in education. And another area is preschool. And then that's another scam. They want to start these kids at age 2 and 3 and 4, get them indoctrinated them young. I think preschool, I'm against preschool and even largely kindergarten. I mean, I wouldn't, like I say, 6 years old, that's plenty good to start a kid in school. Let the kid be a kid. Let the child be a child. Let them play. Let them play in the sandbox or the backyard. They don't need to be learning flashcards at age 3 or starting in a musical instrument at age 3 or playing, like I say, we talked about t-ball or something like that. Parents seem to have a huge desire to start their kids very young. Oh, we got to get them into Harvard, or get them into some great educational institution, so they got to start learning young. That's crazy. Einstein didn't read till he was 9. I mean, it's nuts. All this stuff about starting kids early, it's crazy. Preschool is crazy. I know there's situations where parents have to put kids in daycare. That's another whole ball of wax to talk about that. But the preschooling is just not necessary. It's not good. It can even be harmful. Matter of fact, there's even studies show that kids that start reading earlier, it's not always the greatest thing. It may not be as good as people think it is. It's not necessary at the very least. I mean, most parents want their kids to get started so young on things, and it's actually admitting an inferiority about themselves. I think, well, since we're inferior, we got to start them young so they can get a fair shot at life and stay up with the competition. It's crazy. Putting kids in preschool just for that reason is stupid, and I'm against preschool. Like I say, kindergarten, 6 years old, plenty young to start in school, and even then they get indoctrinated and controlled, and they lose their natural zest for life and creativity. Every child's an artist, every child's creative, and a lot of times school, even private school, saps the artist and the child, saps the creativity, and it's just not good. As you can see, I have a lot of problems with schooling in general. There's a lot of ways you can learn. There's so many ways better to learn than the current public school system. And like I say, it won't happen overnight, but I favor phasing it out. And you get vouchers and things like that. And the public school systems are a mess in the country anyway, and in many areas. And there are some good public schools. There's always exceptions to everything. And there's, like I say, a lot of good teachers. But kids learn differently. The public schools are they're a mess, and they need to be phased out in favor of a private education system in the country, and that would be the answer. The schools are dysfunctional, and we need to keep it close to the local area. There's a principle called subsidiarity, and that means things are best done at the local level, and definitely education. Well, then the argument will be, well, they won't be on a national standard of math or anything like this. They'll be better in that. They'll teach them math, history, actual history, and it'll be much better. But it's really right now something that would be darn near impossible to do, to phase out the public education system in favor of private education, homeschooling. That's the way to go. Kids learn better. There's a lot fewer problems, but the bureaucracy is entrenched, and it's there, and it's like moving mountains. It won't be easy, if at all possible. But there are so many problems with government education. You can start with vouchers and give them some competition. Like I say, they have no competition at this point. They can go whether they teach good or bad. The schools still get the money, and so a lot of problems and with government education, but and all education. Kids are little geniuses. They need that genius brought out. They can learn. Kids can learn no matter who they are, where they are. They can learn, and it just has to be properly taught. There's all kinds of examples of schools in areas that are very poor that get kids to learn, and every child can learn. Every child has an inner genius that needs to be brought out, and government schooling and a lot of times private schooling, they don't do that. And we have many problems with schooling. Got to go forward and just step by step and turn this situation around. And right now, the public school system in this country causes more harm than good, and it's getting worse as each day passes. So thank you for being with us today, and we will talk to you next time.